Raghav, Meera, Ananya, and Kunal, four lives intertwined by love, fear, and secrets, were about to collide in a tragedy no one could have predicted. What began as a quiet life in a new country spiraled into obsession, betrayal, and a shocking crime that would tear a family apart and leave a community questioning everything they thought they knew. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Raghav Malhotra arrived in the United States with a single suitcase and a heavy sense of responsibility. He came from a small city in India where traditions guided everyday life and family reputation mattered more than personal happiness. Moving to America was not his dream, but a decision he believed was necessary for survival. He wanted stability, money, and a future that looked safer than the one he left behind. When he settled in New Jersey with his wife Meera and their daughter Ananya, he promised himself that no matter where they lived, his rules would remain unchanged. Raghav worked at a large warehouse on the outskirts of the city. His job involved long shifts, physical labor, and very little appreciation. Every morning he left home before sunrise and returned late at night, exhausted but proud that he was providing for his family. To his co-workers, he was quiet and distant. He rarely joined conversations and avoided social gatherings. He believed mixing too much with others would weaken his values. America felt like a place full of freedom, but to Raghav, that freedom looked dangerous. At home, Raghav expected discipline. He believed strict control was the only way to raise a child correctly. Ananya had grown up listening more than speaking, following instructions without questions. In India, that behavior brought praise. In America, it made her feel invisible. As she grew older, her surroundings began to influence her. She saw classmates living openly, choosing their own paths, and expressing opinions without fear. Slowly, she started to realize that life could be different. Meera noticed these changes, but stayed silent. She had learned long ago that challenging Raghav only created tension. She focused on keeping peace in the house, even if it meant ignoring her daughter's emotional struggles. The family appeared normal from the outside. Neighbors saw a hard-working immigrant father, a quiet mother, and a well-behaved daughter. No one suspected the pressure building inside those walls. Raghav watched Ananya closely, though he believed he was being protective. Every change in her behavior worried him. Her interest in college activities, her growing independence, and her desire to spend time outside the house felt like threats. He often compared her to the obedient child she once was and felt she was slipping away. He did not understand that Ananya was not rejecting her family, but simply growing into herself. The new country offered opportunities, but it also challenged Raghav's beliefs every day. He feared losing control more than anything else. Deep inside, he believed that if he loosened his grip even slightly, his family would fall apart. That fear quietly shaped his thoughts and actions, setting the foundation for a tragedy that no one saw coming, not even Raghav himself. Ananya Malhotra's world slowly expanded beyond the walls of her home as she entered college. The campus felt alive and open, filled with people who spoke freely and lived without constant fear of judgment. For the first time, she experienced a space where she was not only someone's daughter, but an individual with her own identity. Her days were filled with lectures, library hours, and creative projects that allowed her to express emotions she had kept buried for years. Photography became her escape. She spent hours capturing streets, shadows, and ordinary moments that felt meaningful to her. Through the camera, she found a way to observe life without being noticed. Her photos reflected freedom, movement, and distance, things she quietly desired. She shared her work online under private account, careful to keep it hidden from her family. It was a small secret, but for Ananya, it felt powerful. As time passed, she also built friendships with classmates from different backgrounds. These friendships were simple and supportive, something she had never experienced before. Group study sessions often turned into long evenings on campus. Ananya learned to balance her responsibilities at home with her growing independence outside. She carefully managed her time, always returning before her father could question her absence. Every step she took outside the house required planning and caution. Despite her careful behavior, Ananya felt a constant sense of fear. At home, she remained quiet and respectful, hiding her thoughts behind a calm expression. She avoided conversations that could lead to questions about her personal life. Her phone stayed locked, notifications hidden, and social media activity minimal. She lived two separate lives, one shaped by control and the other by curiosity and hope. Raghav sensed the distance growing between them. He noticed changes in her routine and body language. She spent more time preparing before leaving the house and returned mentally exhausted. Her eyes carried a seriousness that worried him. To Ananya, these were signs of growth and pressure. To Raghav, they looked like warning signs of rebellion. His concerns slowly turned into suspicion. Ananya struggled internally. She wanted to respect her parents while also discovering who she was. The pressure of hiding became overwhelming, but she believed silence was safer than honesty. She convinced herself that once she completed her studies, life would improve. She dreamed of independence, a job, and a future where she would no longer need to hide simple truths. What Ananya did not realize was that her careful secrecy was feeding her father's fears. The more she tried to protect herself, the more distant she appeared. Her hidden world gave her strength, but it also placed her on a path filled with unseen danger. While she focused on building a future, the tension at home continued to grow, quietly moving toward a moment that would change everything forever. Kunal Verma entered Ananya's life in a way that felt natural and unexpected. He was an Indian-origin student who had grown up in the United States, shaped by both cultures but controlled by neither. He understood family expectations, yet he believed personal choices mattered just as much. Ananya met him through a college project, and over time, familiarity turned into comfort. With him, she felt seen without being judged. Their connection grew slowly. It was not dramatic or rushed, but built on shared experiences and quiet understanding. They spent time on campus, studying, walking between buildings, and attending small college events. Ananya felt lighter around him, as if the weight she carried at home temporarily disappeared. Still, she never allowed herself to forget her reality. Every meeting was carefully planned. Every moment outside her routine carried risk. Ananya kept the relationship hidden with extreme care. She believed secrecy was the only way to protect everyone involved. Her parents knew nothing about Kunal. She avoided leaving any trace that could expose her private life. Even when happiness felt close, fear remained stronger. She lived with the constant thought that one mistake could destroy everything she was trying to build. Kunal noticed her caution and emotional distance at times. He respected her boundaries, unaware of the full intensity of her home situation. To him, Ananya appeared reserved but focused, someone carrying responsibilities beyond her age. Their relationship stayed limited to public spaces, avoiding attention. What felt like safety to Ananya was actually a fragile shield. Meanwhile, Raghav's suspicion deepened. He observed patterns in Ananya's schedule and noticed repeated changes. She began returning home with a different energy, sometimes distracted, sometimes unusually quiet. Raghav started checking small details, such as phone usage and the time she spent outside. His thoughts filled with imagined scenarios that fed his fear. Without confronting her, he convinced himself that something unacceptable was happening. Raghav began watching from a distance. He adjusted his work hours when possible and took longer routes home. He did not know names or faces, but he felt certain someone else had entered his daughter's life. Each unanswered question strengthened his belief that control was slipping away. He saw this not as a natural part of growing up, but as a threat to his authority and values. Ananya remained unaware of how closely she was being observed. She believed her careful planning was enough. Her focus stayed on balancing college, family duties, and the small moments of happiness she allowed herself. She did not realize that her silence was being interpreted as guilt and her independence as betrayal. The connection between Ananya and Kunal gave her hope, but it also unknowingly triggered a chain of events beyond her control. While she believed she was protecting her family by staying silent, the distance between father and daughter grew wider. In that growing gap, misunderstanding turned into obsession, quietly setting the stage for a tragedy that was already moving closer. The evening began like any other workday for Raghav, but something felt unsettled inside him. His shift ended earlier than usual due to a delay in operations at the warehouse. Instead of going straight home, he decided to take a longer route through the city. He told himself it was just to clear his head, but deep down, his thoughts were focused on Ananya. Her recent behavior replayed in his mind again and again, filling him with quiet unease. As he drove near the college area, traffic slowed. Cafes, bookstores, and small restaurants lined the street, crowded with students and young professionals. Raghav felt out of place among them. This part of the city represented everything he did not understand about American life. Freedom appeared careless to him, and happiness looked uncontrolled. He parked his car near the sidewalk, planning to rest for a moment before continuing home. That was when he saw her. Ananya was sitting outside a cafe, relaxed and smiling in a way Raghav had not seen at home for a long time. She was not alone. A young man sat across from her, leaning forward, fully engaged in the moment. They looked comfortable, familiar, and unaware of the eyes watching them from across the street. To Raghav, the scene felt unreal, as if time had paused to force him to witness something he feared most. His heart began to race. Thoughts collided in his mind, mixing shock, anger, and disbelief. He watched every small movement, every expression, interpreting them through his own fears. He did not hear laughter or see innocence. Instead, he saw disobedience and loss of control. In that moment, his years of sacrifice felt unrecognized, and his authority felt threatened. Raghav stayed where he was, hidden in plain sight. He did not approach them or create a scene. A strange calm settled over him, masking the storm growing inside. He convinced himself that confronting Ananya in public would only bring shame. He chose silence, believing it gave him time to think. In reality, that silence allowed his emotions to harden. Ananya eventually stood up and walked away with the young man, disappearing into the crowd. Raghav waited until they were gone before starting his car. The city lights blurred as he drove home, his grip tight on the steering wheel. His thoughts shifted from confusion to certainty. In his mind, what he had seen confirmed every fear he had carried for months. At home, the house felt unusually quiet. Raghav sat alone, replaying the scene again and again. Each replay changed slightly, becoming darker and more threatening. He convinced himself that this was no small matter and that ignoring it would only make things worse. By the time Ananya returned home later that night, Raghav's emotions had settled into a dangerous resolve. That evening marked a turning point. What Raghav witnessed was not just a moment outside a cafe. It became the trigger that transformed suspicion into action. Without realizing it, he crossed a line in his own mind, stepping onto a path from which there would be no return. The house felt heavy when Ananya returned that night. The familiar walls no longer offered comfort, only silence. Raghav sat alone, his thoughts fixed on the image he had seen earlier. Hours passed, but his mind did not slow down. Every memory from the past few months blended into one dark conclusion. He believed he had lost control, and in his thinking, control was everything. Ananya sensed tension as soon as she stepped inside. She moved carefully, following her usual routine, unaware that the atmosphere had already changed. Raghav observed her movements closely. To him, every small action felt deliberate, every silence felt like confirmation of betrayal. His emotions were no longer mixed with doubt. They had hardened into certainty, shaped by fear and pride. The pressure inside Raghav reached a breaking point. Years of sacrifice, strict beliefs, and unspoken frustration exploded into a single moment of loss of control. What followed happened quickly, driven by impulse rather than thought. The house that once symbolized safety became the place where everything ended. When it was over, silence returned, heavier than before. Reality slowly began to sink in. Raghav stood frozen, staring at the consequences of his actions. The anger that had fueled him disappeared, replaced by shock and fear. He realized that nothing could be undone. The future he claimed to protect was destroyed by his own hands. Ananya's dreams, her struggles, and her hidden hopes ended within those walls. Panic took over. Raghav's mind shifted from emotion to survival. He believed he could still fix the situation by hiding the truth. He cleaned the house carefully, removing anything that could raise questions. He worked through the night, driven by fear rather than logic. Each step he took pushed him further away from reality. By morning, exhaustion replaced panic. Raghav tried to appear normal, convincing himself that acting calm would keep suspicion away. He avoided looking at certain parts of the house, afraid of what they reminded him of. Guilt stayed buried deep inside, covered by denial. He told himself that silence was necessary, that the truth would destroy everything. As the day passed, worry from outside began to grow. Ananya did not respond to messages or calls. Raghav prepared himself to play the role of a concerned father. He believed that showing worry would protect him. Deep inside, however, fear continued to grow. He knew mistakes had been made, and no amount of planning could fully erase them. That night marked the point where tragedy turned into a crime. Raghav crossed from belief into irreversible action. What began as fear of losing control ended in the complete loss of everything he claimed to value. The house stood unchanged from the outside, but inside, nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Raghav forced himself to follow a routine as if nothing had happened. He woke up early, showered, and prepared tea with shaking hands. The house was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, but he told himself that quiet was better than questions. His mind stayed focused on one goal only, keeping the truth hidden for as long as possible. Fear guided every thought and action. He began planning carefully. He moved objects around the house, cleaning surfaces again and again, even when there was nothing left to remove. Every small mark felt dangerous. He separated items and disposed of them in different places across the city, believing distance would erase connection. Each trip he took felt longer than the last, as guilt followed him everywhere. Still, he convinced himself that this effort was necessary. By midday, Raghav prepared to report Ananya missing. He practiced his expression in the mirror, trying to look worried but not panicked. He reminded himself to stay calm and consistent. When he finally contacted authorities, he focused on details that made him appear like a caring father. He mentioned her routine, her college schedule, and her quiet nature. He avoided anything that could lead attention back to the house. Soon, neighbors and members of the local community began offering support. Search efforts started around the college area and nearby neighborhoods. Posters were printed, and Ananya's photo spread across social media. Raghav joined these efforts, standing among others, hiding in plain sight. He lowered his head often, appearing exhausted and broken. Many felt sympathy for him, unaware of what he was hiding. At home, Mira struggled with confusion and fear. Ananya's absence felt unreal, but Raghav avoided emotional conversations. He controlled the situation by staying busy and distant. He believed that emotions would create mistakes. Silence became his shield, even as pressure increased around him. However, the more Raghav tried to control the situation, the more cracks began to form. His timeline did not fully match security camera footage from nearby streets. Investigators noticed his movements around the city on the night Ananya disappeared. Small details, such as receipts and phone location data, quietly raised suspicion. Raghav sensed the attention shifting, but refused to believe he would be exposed. Days passed, and the search intensified. Media coverage grew, and questions became more direct. Raghav's calm behavior started to feel unnatural under pressure. He repeated the same details again and again, unaware that repetition itself was becoming suspicious. The story he built so carefully began to weaken under scrutiny. Late at night, when no one was watching, fear returned stronger than ever. Sleep became impossible. Raghav replayed his actions in his mind, searching for mistakes. He believed he could still survive if he stayed disciplined. What he failed to understand was that the truth leaves traces no matter how carefully someone tries to erase it. The attempt to hide the crime did not bring relief. It only extended the suffering and deepened the damage. What Raghav thought was control slowly turned into exposure, pulling him closer to the consequences he tried so desperately to avoid. As the investigation continued, the focus slowly shifted toward Raghav. What once looked like a worried father's actions began to appear calculated under closer examination. Investigators started comparing timelines, movements, and digital records. Small inconsistencies that seemed harmless at first now stood out clearly. Each detail added weight to a growing suspicion that something was deeply wrong. Security camera footage from nearby streets showed Raghav's car traveling through areas he claimed he never visited that night. His explanation for these movements lacked clarity. At the same time, phone location data revealed gaps that could not be easily explained. Investigators noticed that his phone had been inactive for a suspicious amount of time during critical hours. These details alone were not enough, but together they formed a troubling pattern. Attention soon returned to the house. Forensic teams conducted a deeper examination, focusing on areas that had been cleaned excessively. Certain surfaces showed signs of disturbance that did not match an accidental disappearance. Chemical traces suggested attempts to remove evidence rather than normal household cleaning. What Raghav believed he had erased had only been hidden poorly. Ananya's digital life also revealed information Raghav did not anticipate. Investigators uncovered her private photography account and her connection to Kunal. Phone records confirmed frequent contact between them. This discovery changed the direction of the case. The narrative of a simple disappearance no longer fit. It pointed toward a personal conflict rooted inside the family. Raghav's behavior during questioning raised further concern. His calm tone and repeated statements felt rehearsed. He avoided emotional reactions even when faced with new evidence. Investigators noticed that his answers lacked natural variation, as if memorized. Under pressure, his control began to slip. His explanations grew shorter, and his body language showed signs of stress. Community support for Raghav quietly faded as details emerged. Those who once stood beside him began to distance themselves. Media coverage shifted from sympathy to scrutiny. Headlines questioned the family dynamics and Raghav's strict nature. The image he worked so hard to protect began to collapse in public view. Eventually, the evidence reached a point where denial was no longer possible. Forensic findings, location data, and behavioral analysis formed a complete picture. Authorities concluded that Ananya's disappearance was not voluntary and not accidental. Raghav was taken into custody as the primary suspect. The arrest marked the end of the search and the beginning of the truth. What started as hidden tension inside a home had grown into a case that shocked the community. Investigators moved forward with confidence, knowing the evidence spoke louder than any story Raghav tried to maintain. The cracks in his carefully built image had widened beyond repair. Control, which Raghav valued above all else, slipped away completely. The truth surfaced not through emotion or confession, but through details that refused to stay buried. The path toward justice had finally begun. The trial moved forward quietly but with heavy attention. Evidence replaced emotion, and facts spoke where words failed. Every detail collected during the investigation was presented carefully, building a clear picture of what had happened inside the Malhotra household. Raghav sat through the proceedings, no longer in control of the story. The calm image he once maintained had no value against physical proof and digital records. Forensic reports confirmed what investigators had suspected from the beginning. The house, once presented as a place of safety, was revealed as the center of the crime. Timelines aligned with location data, and attempts to hide evidence only strengthened the case against him. There were no dramatic moments in the courtroom, only a slow and unavoidable unraveling of the truth. Raghav's actions were shown not as protection, but as destruction driven by fear and rigid beliefs. Ananya's life was examined in detail during the trial. Her college records, creative work, and private online presence revealed a young woman trying to balance responsibility and independence. She was described through her ambitions, not through accusations. The court saw her not as a rebel, but as someone seeking a normal life. The contrast between her quiet hopes and her tragic end left a deep impact on everyone present. Mira's silence throughout the case reflected years of emotional suppression. While she was not held responsible, her position highlighted the consequences of fear within a family. The court acknowledged the environment of control that shaped the household, making it clear that violence often grows where voices are ignored. The trial exposed not just a crime, but a pattern of behavior rooted in misplaced authority. When the verdict was delivered, there was no relief, only finality. Raghav was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The punishment did not bring Ananya back, nor did it repair the damage done. It simply marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another shaped by loss and regret. Raghav's future would now exist behind walls, ruled by the same isolation he once enforced at home. The case gained attention beyond the courtroom. It sparked discussions within immigrant communities across the country. Many saw it as a warning about the dangers of extreme control and unresolved fear. The story became a lesson on how outdated beliefs, when forced onto changing lives, can lead to irreversible consequences. Ananya's story did not end with the verdict. Her photographs were later shared by friends and classmates as a way to remember her. Through those images, her perspective on the world lived on. They reflected curiosity, freedom, and quiet strength, everything she never fully experienced. The documentary ends with a hard truth. Violence does not come from love, but from fear disguised as authority. When control replaces understanding, families break in the most devastating ways. Ananya's life was taken, but her story remains, serving as a reminder that freedom denied can destroy far more than it ever protects.